can't hit it twice. Ooh, hang on. Shalom. Shalom, my friends. I am here today to tell you my story, the story of what Jesus did for me. You might have heard my story. It is written in 3 of the gospel stories. You would find my story in Matthew, where he talks about 2 blind men who are coming to hear the crowd coming for Jesus as they are exiting Jericho. And then you might have read it in Luke. Dr. Luke writes it also. Matthew was there, Dr. Luke was not. But he was serious about his study to interview people and find out what happened. But he only talks about one blind man who gets his sight. And he does not know the name of that man. Now, Mark writes this story also in his gospel, young John Mark. And he writes a story of just one. But where in Matthew you have them exiting a city, you have them approaching Jericho in the other 2 stories. And while Mark has just the one story, mine, he mentions my name, Bartimaeus. And so I think there are some people who are skeptical about the Lord and who want to say, aha, there's a problem with the Bible here because either there was one or there was 2. Which was it? Were they coming out of Jericho or were they going into Jericho? Which one was it? Something must be wrong. So what was it really? Was it 1 or 2? Was it approaching or exiting? And my answer to you is yes. It was. It was both. It was all of those things. Let me explain how these stories are all about the same incident. You see, in my day, there were 2 Jerichos. There was the old Jericho, and then a small distance away, very, very close, was where the new Jericho was being built, and people were living there also. And so here we are, beggars throughout the city. But I, a blind man at the time, found that, especially on holy times, it would be very good to be in between the 2 Jerichos, where I would be more likely to catch people on their path through New Jericho on the road up to Jerusalem. And so there we were. There was another man with me, also blind. We did not often beg together, but we were there that day. Alms for the poor, help a poor blind man. And there we are when the crowd comes, and people are going up to Jerusalem, and then it's a loud crowd, and there's almost a riot going on. What's all this noise? And of course, we couldn't see to know what it was. And so there it is that we have people yelling and talking, wanting to be with Jesus, and we're saying, what's going on? What's happening? What is it? What is it? What's the disturbance here? And others were telling us, oh, be quiet, because we want to hear what he has to say. Be quiet. You're just a blind man, obviously cursed by God or something, but just be quiet. We've got to hear. And when somebody said, it's Jesus of Nazareth, when we heard that, we realized this was our big chance. If we were ever to get our sight, it might be from this one who obviously we had never seen, but we had heard about him. Jesus was a miracle worker. Others had received all kinds of blessings from him. And so as he approached, I yelled out, Lord, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. And the other man started yelling the same thing right next to it, echoing, Lord, Son of David, have mercy on me. And I'm thinking, well, I don't mind if he helps you, but I don't want to miss it. Lord, help us both. Lord, have mercy on us. And Jesus heard us. And the procession stopped. And Jesus sent one man over to us to ask what we wanted. And said, oh, we want to, oh, Lord Jesus, have mercy. And Jesus called us to him. So we went up to him. And they brought us to him. And I fell to my knees. I believe I heard the other blind man doing the same. And Jesus said to us, what would you have me do for you? And we both said at the same time, Lord, I want to see. Well, apparently he reached out both hands and put one on the eyes of each of us. And when he removed his hands, I could see. I could see. I had been blind, as far as I know, all my life. But now I was able to be human again. I would be allowed to go to work other than begging. I would be allowed to go to the temple itself where people with problems, like mine, could not go. And so I didn't know what else to do. I was just so joyous. My life was now changed. I'd have to get a job. And I looked forward to that. But more than just finding work to do, I thought, I can't leave this man. I want to follow you. And Jesus invited us to join the crowd. So we started following right that day and walked with him on up to the road to Jerusalem. It was 20 miles away uphill. And about 18 miles that way, there's a stop at Bethany. Well, as we got to that point, Jesus and his disciples and the crowd with him was going to stop. They were going to stay at the home of a man named Lazarus with his sisters Mary and Martha. They were letting people sleep in their yard. And we were all invited to supper with Jesus. Here's this wealthy family, and they're willing to share so much. And the crowd was mainly stopping there, but others went on to Jerusalem. And so as I was invited, I thanked them and I had supper there. But somebody was going on to Jerusalem, and I thought, I'd like to see it. All my life, I've never seen Jerusalem. I would like to be there from on the hills that I heard about, like the hills of Gethsemane, the Mount of Olives, the site of the Golden Dome there, of the temple. So many things that now I could see. And when someone was going on to Jerusalem, I asked if I might go too. And they invited me. So I went with, and we walked the last 2 miles. And as we got closer, someone asked me, well, where are you going to spend the night tonight? And I said, oh, I had not thought about that. I have nowhere to spend the night. And one man smiled and said, let me take you to a friend of mine. And so we walked a few more blocks, and he took us to a nice home. And it was run by a woman named Mary, and she lived with her son, John Mark. Then we knocked on the outer gate. We were admitted by a servant girl. And then we went on in and knocked on the other door, and it was immediately opened by this young man, John Mark. And so when his mother came, I said, I once was blind, but now I see. And she smiled at me and said, Jesus. And I said, yes. But I need a place to stay the night. And she said, of course, come on in. So I ended up having a late meal with them. And young John Mark started asking me questions. And that's why the story might differ a little with his account. There were 2 of us, but Luke only got to interview one later on, not me, so he didn't know about my name. Matthew heard about the 2. He saw the 2 of us, but he never interviewed us to find out any more about us. So I'm telling my story to John Mark. And he's saying, okay, how did it happen? And he writes the whole story down. And then he said, and now what is your name? And I said, I'm Bartimaeus. And he said, yes, that's how you introduced yourself to us before, but what is your name? I said, my name is Bartimaeus. And he smiled and he said, doesn't Bartimaeus mean son of Timaeus? I said, yes. He said, so what's your other name? What's your given name? And I said, I don't have one. And he said, how can you not have a name? And I said, well, my mother died in childbirth, and my father not that long afterwards. And so there I was, raised by kind people who knew me as nothing other than the son of Timaeus. And so I've been called Bartimaeus all my life, and I figured that was enough for a beggar man. And it said, so there is no other name that you know? And I said, no, there is none other. And that's how John Mark got my name as Bartimaeus for his gospel. Now, I have thought about this afterwards, didn't think much about it growing up. Bartimaeus is a name. Other people have strange other names, like perhaps yours is a bit strange, or would sound like it to me. But as I thought about it, I realized, you know what? My name's not important. I am of no consequence. It isn't my name that is important. It's what Jesus has done for me. That is truly important. That's my story. Others might relate it, but they can't tell it personally as I can, my story of what Jesus did for me. It has nothing to do with my name. It has everything to do with Jesus. and His love and His grace and His mercy to me. Now, that's the easy part of the message I have for you today, too. The harder part is this. Even though I do not know your name, and perhaps it's very famous or very important to you, but in the way of the world, your name is of no consequence either. It's not about you as much as it is about what Jesus has done for you. Telling your story is what's really important. We ought to each be telling our story. If we have other stories to tell, that's good too, but we need to be passing it on. Let me refer you to a story I learned while I was in heaven. I've been there for a long time, and someday you'll join me there. But while I was there, I was talking to a man named George, and he told me about an incident that happened in his life. Now, there are so many centuries that have come and gone, you might not know all these people that you'll meet someday. Well, that's the fun thing about heaven, going around to talk to each of these people and finding out, what did Jesus do for you? And here I am talking to George, and I asked him, well, can you tell me an interesting story about what Jesus had done for you, or something special in your life? And he said, yes, I'll tell you. You see, a long time ago, during what we called World War II, I was the King of England. I said, England I've never heard of. He said, it was a famous country at my time here a number of years back. And I was the king, and I gave messages over the radio. That's a way for us to speak to people far away. And he said, sometimes I would want to get on my radio and be able to give a message to people across the ocean. And I thought he was pretending. He said, no, it was for real. We knew how to do that. And so we had a line that would carry my voice across the ocean to people far away in my vast kingdom. And then he said, one day I was trying to give a message around Christmas time when we celebrate the birth of Jesus. And as I'm speaking, I find out later that the wire that would take my voice and take the message over across the sea, the wire broke. And I'm still talking, but the message is not going through because the wire was broken. And I found out that one of the technicians who works for me picked up one end in one hand and one end in the other, and he held it out. And he was there to be that wire, to let the message go from my voice across the ocean. But there was someone else in between sharing the story that the king had to give to his kingdom. That sounded like such a great message to me. I want to pass it on to you, because you might be that link that's going to take a message of Jesus to someone who is far away from him. You need to be the one to tell your story. So let me be pointed on this. Do your children and grandchildren know how you came to trust in Jesus? Have you told the story of when you first believed, and other times in your life what Jesus has done for you? Do your neighbors know your story? This is not a story you're supposed to keep to yourself and die with. It's not a secret. It should be told to everyone what Jesus did for you. And they will then maybe meet him too and come to know him and have their own story to pass on so that the whole world might believe. God bless you. Tell your story.